following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. Hello, listeners on Saga 960 AM and those listening around the world on streaming and podcast services. This is It's Not Therapy. I'm Liana and I am not a therapist, but I am your source for practical advice for everyday problems, using my top 10 sayings for checking in with your best self. This episode, we're talking holiday stress and how to reduce it. The interview tonight is University of South Florida School of Marketing faculty member Russell Clayton, PhD. Now, why do I have a marketing faculty member on? Well, Russell's going to talk to us about how a business-informed mindset can help you manage holiday stress, doing something different this time around. I love it. You'll love it. It's all about expectations. It's awesome. You know, healthy goals are based on things you can control. Because there's a business to the holidays, right? We're already into shopping season, so a lot of you listening out there might be in a profound state of the holidays. There's a lot of expectation around the holidays, isn't there? The pressure to make it the happiest time of the year when it's not. The practical point of winter festivals, historically, involving lights and rich food, is that we're in a time of the year when the days are short, the weather is cold and wet, everything is dark, and we feel blah. Our bodies want to hibernate like a bear, right? It's the exact opposite of the happiest time of the year. And that's before we get into messy family dynamics. Yeah, those family dynamics, right? A lot of ways those can screw with us, yeah. If you've got a question inspired by this episode that I don't address in what I say tonight, because we got less than an hour, you can give me a call, 289-275-9600, 289-275-9600, or Liana at nottherapyshow.com, Lian as in Nancy A at nottherapyshow.com. Or if you have trouble spelling my name, you can go to nottherapyshow.com and fill out the contact form. Make it nice and easy. Or Twitter, Instagram, Not Therapy Show. Now about me. I share these things because I think it's important to invest, to connect, to let you know that I'm not sitting here in an ivory tower with a perfect life looking down on all of you. Oh, I know everything, right? No. My wisdom comes from pain. As a kid, I had really complex feelings about the holidays. The presents were nice. We didn't have a lot of money growing up, but everything involving people kind of sucked. Older family members would pick on me. And then I'd get blamed for not being tough enough when they picked on me. And I had to hug and kiss people I didn't want to. A lot of them smelled funny and were kind of slimy. I don't know why. And then adults got drunk a lot. And that could really be scary. Sometimes they'd yell or fight. Sometimes they'd even grab me harder than I think they intended. I hope. Now, one of my copes as a kid was reading the manuals in video games, like Atari and Sega video games. Yes, going back that far. There were manuals in video game boxes back then. Now, I wasn't allowed to play the games I got right away at holiday family gatherings because that wasn't polite. But I could read the manual again and again because reading was considered a good thing instead of a selfish thing. And I could zone out even in a room full of people. Read the manual again and again. It was like clinging to the promise of something fun and safe. And I wasn't treated, well, I was treated as weird, nerdy. But it wasn't too rude or too embarrassing, because embarrassing my parents at these gatherings was bad. Now, as I got older, I overcompensated on the holidays, trying to make everything super happy and pretty with the best food and decorations to force the holidays to be a better time. And it was exhausting, not just for me, but everyone around me. And I could never meet the expectations I set. Not only was I disappointing myself, I was overwhelming the other people around me because they couldn't keep up with, Wonder Woman holiday period, better than everything, super expert gift wrapping, all the best personalized homemade everything. No, that doesn't spark joy, right? Even before COVID, I started easing off that kind of holiday on steroids. I still cook enough food for an army because I enjoy it, and leftovers are great in the week, after Christmas, that Boxing Day when you're not really doing anything, but you don't want to cook. And, if you cook a bunch of stuff on Christmas Eve, you got Christmas Eve and then Christmas Day and then Boxing Day and maybe the 27th, and you can eat all the way to New Year's. And I don't even really celebrate Christmas religiously. I still make Christmas dinner just because it's freaking fun. I do latkes too. I like to cook holiday food. But I've backed way off on the consumerism element of the holidays. I mean, okay, groceries are expensive enough this year, right? But I changed my relationship with expectation regarding the holidays, tying into one of my top 10 phrases. Perfect is a lie. Stop trying to be perfect. Now, when I say this top 10 phrase, people usually go, well, of course. But really? We say nobody's perfect. But then we want things. Especially special occasions. Especially special occasions in those really toxic Hallmark movies. Holidays, weddings, that kind of stuff. We want it to be perfect. But a perfect holiday is highly subjective. And quite frankly, not really achievable and potentially kind of boring. Some of the best stories are when things don't go according to plan. And something won't go according to plan because people are involved. And this is where we get into the role of control. The role of control in your relationship with the holidays can't be overstated. Why do you hate going to your family? Because they don't respect boundaries, right? Why do you hate the office party? Because of the office bullies. Why don't you want to invite your sister's boyfriend? Because he's a jerk who doesn't know his limits with booze, right? I just picked sister's boyfriend off the top of my head. It can be any relative of any gender, right? The point is, holiday misery is, in large part, about having to deal with people who can't behave, don't respect boundaries, and so make you feel like you're not in control of your holiday experience. An example. I've been hearing this from clients a lot the last few weeks, especially American clients who had Thanksgiving recently. They were dreading the, why don't you have a girlfriend? Why aren't you married yet? That from family. Now, I don't know why some families still don't realize how invasive this is, what tender ground this is stepping on, but this is still a pretty common complaint. Now, I can validate for you that it's a pretty garbage thing to do to someone to get them to focus on what their life is perceived to be lacking in any way around the holiday. If you can, set an example, encourage your loved ones to focus on what people have, not what they don't have. If you're expecting to get nagged about something, prepare something, yep. I don't have that, but I've been focusing on this other thing, and that's going really great. Now, I'm going to get into more on ways your family might be making you bad crazy and what to do about it in the final segment of this show. Because there's more to the pre-holiday period. That consumerism stuff. Again, like I said, I used to do that too. Family example I had to break. If you're spending thousands of dollars on gifts because you feel like you have to, not because you want to, or if you're just burning yourself out, making shopping too complicated, it's time to reassess priorities, possibly even reassess who you have in your life and where this pressure is coming from. Rule of thumb for me, because, don't let problems that aren't your fault lead to mistakes that are. Everything during the holidays should be opt-in, not opt-out. Because then there's the fact that it's cold and flu season, or crisis on infant vaccination season, or both. If I seem a little off, it's because it took me 4 tries to get a flu shot this winter, so guess who's pushing through side effects to do this show right now? This guy. When your arm is sore and you're feeling a bit stiff neck and not right there, are you really at peak for complex socializing? No. Now I got the flu shot because there's holiday Christmas parties coming up, including the Saga 960 Christmas party that I'm actually looking forward to. The producer's listening to this show, and the boss is like, are you talking about me with this professional socializing bit? No. Okay. Some of the most dehumanizing, bullying, sexually harassing, hilariously awful stories of toxic work environments come out of office holiday parties. But enough about my work in Canadian TV, right? And I got the flu shot because I don't want to end up sick from parties, as well as having to face, the past trauma of those. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but alcohol plus insecurity leads to some of the worst behavior imaginable. And one of my superpowers is that for some reason, it's great for this line of work, but people like to tell me their entire life stories within 20 minutes of meeting me. So imagine the overshares I get at holiday parties. It's a mood. I am not ashamed to admit that I have spent a lot of time hiding in very expensive looking downtown Toronto bathrooms to avoid re-engaging with someone who feels like they made a new Insta bestie when it was too loud in the room for me to even hear their name. And then there's the friends groups that suffer because everyone's busier around the holidays, right? With all this other stuff. But a lot of people are also having more crises, valid crises, but, timing. Genius companies like to do layoffs right before the holidays. People ghost a lot during the holidays, possibly because got laid off. Or because they're not serious about the relationship and don't want to buy a gift. I've heard that happen. It's awful. In general, people start dreading the allegedly most wonderful time of the year, so other things bubble up. I've been getting quite a few new clients who are finally ready to deal with their trauma in the last couple weeks, sometimes because a friend dragged them to a session. This time of year makes everything you're going through feel bigger and scarier. So we're going to talk to someone who can help with that. Russell Clayton, PhD, will be with us after the break to talk about how to reduce holiday stress using business concepts. You're not going to want to miss that after this on It's Not Therapy. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. It's time once again for the It's Not Therapy interview, and on this interview we do have a bit of an audio issue, so hopefully it'll hold, but I'm letting everybody know in advance so they're not like, what is that sound? But I've got a great guest to talk to us about reducing holiday stress. We've got Russell Clayton, PhD from the University of South Florida. He's a faculty member there. You can check him out at russellclayton.net. Now, Russell, I came across your article in Psychology Today, and I love what you do with expectation setting. And you notice I set expectations for the audio thing so we can get away with more technical difficulties. But
I love it.
You come at this from a business approach, don't you?
I do.
Yeah.
I heard a quote a long time ago that stress comes from unmet expectations.
Mm-hmm.
And I have taken that not only into just my own personal life, but as you mentioned, from a business perspective.
Yeah, and I love this because obviously, I mean, business resilience, getting to yes, all that stuff. It business people are masters of this stuff, and pivoting the idea of setting expectations to the holidays. I thought this was brilliant because, whenever you get into something like the military or a high stress job or even something like PTSD therapy where they tell you going in, it's a hard solution to a hard problem. That is setting expectations, right? I say on this show, ignoring negatives isn't being positive. And that's the core of your approach, right? You set the table with potential negatives early on. And so it seems more manageable when you may encounter them. Have I got that right?
Absolutely. I think you nailed it there when you said you set the table with the negatives, and it's not it's not a negative approach. I love that you said, we can't avoid the negatives, we
Hmm.
can't ignore them. And this isn't a pessimistic approach by any means, but it's a realistic approach to managing holiday stress. It's unless you are in the extreme minority, there is going to be stress
Hmm.
around the holidays. Here, here in Tampa Bay, in Florida, we're in full advertising season for Christmas and the holidays,
Hmm.
and I've seen so many television ads that the core of their punchline, if you will, is the holiday stress. It's not
Hmm.
even about the product, really. There was a wireless telephone ad for a service, and it was all about the holiday stress.
Hmm.
So, absolutely being realistic that there's probably going to be some stress, and as you said, setting the table with the negatives to know that they're a possibility. Absolutely, that's going to help us.
Yeah. Now you talked about the fact that if you go in with an expectation and it's exceeded, people see it as a positive experience. If you go in with an expectation and it's not met, then it's a negative one. And I had a client last week where we were actually doing some work on that, which is why this is such serendipitous timing, because he was afraid, oh, his cousins were going to make fun of him at the holidays. And so we sort of went, okay, what are you going to do? How are you going to handle it? And it didn't happen. And so he emailed me afterwards, hey, it was actually pretty good. And then he talked about all these other things that happened that weren't great, but his attitude was, no, this was good because it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. Now,
Exactly.
yeah. Now, how do you do that without psyching yourself out so much that you end up bailing out or not going or not sleeping the night before?
I think that's the key is
Yeah.
to stop ourselves from not overplaying this, from not, as you said, psyching ourselves out. And I think realistic is the key word. For example, if you're going to travel, if you're going to fly during the holidays, well,
Mm-hmm.
a realistic perspective is there's probably going to be a delay. That's
Mm-hmm.
realistic. But don't psych yourself out to the point that you tell yourself, well, the flight's going to get completely canceled, so I may as well just not go.
Mm-hmm.
That's while cancellations happen, it's far fewer than just simply a delay. And do we enjoy delays? No. But if we know that it's a possibility, it's going to make it less negative. But again, I think just being realistic and saying, all right, it's probably not going to be that bad. I'm not going to not be able to fly. I may have to fly the next day,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm not going to be completely shut out of flying to my destination for the holidays. So just keeping it realistic, and what you mentioned about your client and talking about his relatives and perhaps, just the unflattering conversation, you know, that that's probably going to happen at a lot of dinner tables here during the
Mm-hmm.
holidays. But I think, as you said, to keep from psyching ourselves out about this, to put it into perspective and to say, how big of a deal is this? Maybe they make fun of me because of, and then fill in the blank for whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they make fun of me, but how big of a deal is it really? And you can even kind of play a little mind game with yourself and say maybe they're doing it because they're insecure.
Mm-hmm.
You can kind of it can kind of go down a rabbit hole from there, which we have to be careful about. But I think just being realistic about what those negatives could be, just like we want to be realistic about the positives, not letting ourselves go too far down that path of the negativity.
Yeah, and that's a balance that a lot of people struggle with. And I mean, obviously, I love the business approach to it because one, I think it actually helps regulate feelings a little bit. It puts you in a different headspace as opposed to this expectations of idyllic family Christmases. You know, all of a sudden we teleport into a Charles Dickens novel and we're all wearing period dress and eating plum pudding that nobody likes, but everybody associates
Right,
it with Christmas,
right.
right? Putting this in more of a business paradigm, of more of a negotiation, I think really helps with emotional regulation on
Yeah,
this. Yeah.
you're absolutely right. And kind of the way this all came about with me is while I was working on my PhD, I studied this business concept called realistic job previews.
Hmm.
Because when we hire people, especially in a tough market right now where there are more jobs than there are people to fill them, we tend to focus on only the good. You know, come work for us. We're going to pay you well and everything's going to be wonderful.
Hmm.
Well, that sets up the potential employee for disappointment when they get into that job and then they find out, oh, you're going to pay me well, but you also expect me to work 7 nights a week. I didn't know that was part of it.
Hmm.
So, this idea of including negative information in a realistic job preview, for example, during an interview, has shown to work wonders in business. And I thought, all right, let's apply this to the holidays because yeah, there's going to be some negative experience. It's not going to be the Dickens novel type setup like you
Hmm.
mentioned. It's
Hmm.
it's going to be more like Christmas Vacation, National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation
Yeah.
is more likely. And but when we know that that could happen, we can then put those experiences into perspective and say, okay, how big of a deal is this? The turkey was ruined, it got overcooked. How big of a deal is that? We still have other food.
Hmm.
And it can lead us to appreciate what we do have, and now you're starting to tie in a little bit of gratitude, which you're aware of, is very powerful.
Hmm.
But all in all, as you said, it helps us to regulate our emotions because we can focus on, all right, that negative thing happened at the dinner table. How big of a deal is it? It's probably not that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things. And look at all the fantastic things that I do have going during this holiday season.
And I think with the realistic preview model, it also gives people an opportunity to decide in advance whether it's worth going at all, right? Because one of the things that makes things seem like a big deal is the feeling that you're trapped or you can't walk away or you don't have an exit strategy.
Exactly. In the business context, it's fantastic because it allows a potential employee to self-select out and
Yeah.
say, you know what, I'm not going to go for that job, which that's a win for everybody. That's a
Yeah.
win for the employee and a win for the company. Well, in the holiday situation, as you mentioned, it does give us a preview of what could happen. And if we are being realistic about it and not overly dramatic, but if we're realistic and we can look at that and say, hey, maybe I am better off not going to that dinner. Um, or maybe I should talk to someone, whether that's a friend, maybe that's, a counselor, a therapist, talk to someone. Hey, here's what I think could happen at this
Hmm.
dinner. And A, should I go? Or B, if I do go, how do I exit if things get uncomfortable? How do I exit if I'm just not in a place to be able to handle it? So it's a great tool to kind of help us prepare beforehand for scenarios that could happen.
Hmm. Yeah, and obviously, in terms of realism, somebody who's, say, a recovering alcoholic and the family is pushing alcohol on him, that's possibly a deal breaker, right? Whereas somebody just being unpleasant and too pushy, maybe there are strategies to deal with that aren't sort of this black or white, all or nothing thing that I think a lot of people set an unrealistic expectation on themselves to have this fountain of resilience that never runs dry and it's some sort of a failing that they can't take it, as opposed to finding better negotiated strategies with their families to deal with it, right? And again, that's more of a business approach than a family of origin approach, isn't it? It's setting your terms going in.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, and I think something to reiterate that you mentioned, there are certainly those non-negotiables, and I think the example of the alcoholic and the alcohol
Mm-hmm.
being present, that's a fantastic example. But then on the other end of the spectrum is we wanna make sure we don't catastrophize things,
Right.
and, look at, well, all right, there's gonna be that family member, whether it's, the cranky uncle or the grandma that's always picking on you about not getting married or finishing school,
Mm-hmm.
there that exists. Let's not catastrophize that because I don't have a hard number for it, but I'd say 99% of the time that's probably not a big deal. Uh, no one likes to be made fun of or poked
Mm-hmm.
at, but also, that gives us, as you mentioned, that negotiation strategy to perhaps speak up and say, all right, I know Uncle Joe is probably going to start picking at me about fill in the blank. Well, I'm going to speak up and ask him politely, hey, I prefer that we not talk about that. I would
Mm-hmm.
prefer that, my college experience right now is off limits. My dating experience right now is off limits. And trust that they're going to accept that, they're going to respect that, and then maybe even come up with a contingency plan if they don't.
Yeah.
So, absolutely, this is like entering into a negotiation. The the switch is that in this scenario, the other person, maybe it's the cranky uncle, he doesn't necessarily know that he's in the negotiation yet,
Yeah.
but you're already preparing for it.
Okay, we have to go to a break. We have to negotiate with our sponsors. And we're going to talk more about negotiation when we come back with Russell Clayton, PhD, University of South Florida faculty member, russellclayton.net. More on negotiating a less stressful holiday and what you have to do to be more successful and less stressed when we come back on It's Not Therapy. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back on It's Not Therapy talking to Russell Clayton. Russell's a faculty member at University of Southern Florida. Russell's a PhD. You can find him at russellclayton.net. And we are talking applying business strategies to reduce holiday stress. And before the break, we were talking negotiation. Yeah, and one of the things an MBA friend of mine told me is you go into a negotiation from a position of strength if you're prepared to walk away. If you're not
E-
prepared to walk away, they gotcha,
Exactly. Yeah,
right?
you have to know what it is that you want out of it, what's going to be a win, and keep in mind that it should be technically it should be a win-win. Uncle Joe should be able to stay at the dinner table too. We're not necessarily advocating that we just kick him outside into the
Mm-hmm.
snow while we stay inside and have a pleasant dinner, but we also know that that's not reality sometimes, that win-win may not occur, and it's in our best interest to look after ourselves, and that's where it sort of differs in the negotiation sort of example here. But you're absolutely right. Coming in with a position of power is the key, and I think if we really look at it, most of us are going to go into these situations with the position of power because one alternative is simply just to not go.
Right. Right. And also just not, I mean, that thing you said about not engaging, setting boundaries and eh, this is your family. You assume they love you. If you don't, why are you going? But,
Right.
assuming they love you, it's amazing how many people think my family loves me, but I can't set boundaries. That's something I challenge and say, well, if they do love you, why can't they accept you don't want to talk about something? And those sort of limits and not reasonable expectations that people put on themselves to be the dumping ground or the flex point of the family. That's something your approach addresses as well, right? Gives people more confidence to affirmatively state what they will and will not accept from one of these gatherings.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think a point of clarity for us, for you, for me, if we're doing
Mhm.
this, for the listener, if they're doing this, is to really think deeply about what will you accept? What
Mhm.
will you not accept? Because oftentimes we could go into that type of situation and just say, all right, I know it's going to be negative potentially, but I don't know exactly why.
Mhm.
So kind of figuring out what's the trigger? Is it if they talk about your dating life or the fact that you're not married or what, if that's the trigger, then realize that and talk about that in advance in terms of this is something that's off limits. Please respect that. You know, like you said, it's our family. If the situation is family that we're talking about,
Mhm.
going to a dinner or whatnot, they should respect that. But again, the reality is that sometimes the ones that love us the most will pick on us the most,
Mhm.
and that's very unfair. And all you can do is to ask, let's not talk about me failing out of college. Let's not talk about me losing my job or whatever the case is,
Mhm.
and hope that they respect that, but also have your own exit plan in case, in case that's not respected.
Now that's a good point. I'm assuming family with this one, but office parties can be a real source of stress for people. Those are very different things, right? Those are fun, but it's fun in a professional setting, and there are guardrails that matter. And these are your work people. These aren't your friends, right? They may be friendly work colleagues, but they're not your friends. So, what's some tips from you for this approach to the office party? Because we're getting back into those after 2 years of COVID, and some people might be a bit rusty in terms of expectation setting there.
Yeah, you can always try to do your best to identify amongst those who are going to be there, those coworkers, maybe it's the boss, maybe it's the big boss of the company that's going to be there, and trying to decide, do you want to mingle with those people specifically, or is there a safer group of
Hmm.
coworkers that you can stick with during that office party or the gathering. So that's one tip, is to figure out who do I want to socialize with during this time. Also, trying to do your best to figure out, like you said, we've had a layoff here of about 2 years where these parties haven't
Hmm.
been taking place. So trying to figure out, well, what's appropriate? Is it okay if I drink at this party? Yes, alcohol will be served, but is it okay that I drink? And that's from two perspectives. One, what happens to me when I drink? Am I am
Hmm.
I on am I still on my good behavior? And then on the other hand is just what expectations are there at the party? Maybe it's that, I don't know, I'm just thinking out of the box here, but maybe you work with a bunch of people who don't drink, and so maybe you don't drink as well, in order to sort of be there, in solidarity with them. Maybe you mentioned upfront the alcoholic example. Well,
Hmm.
maybe you play that card and say, okay, well, I'm not going to do that tonight. I'm going to manage myself in that regard and be an ally for this coworker.
Hmm. Hmm. Or people with religious exemptions to alcohol,
Exactly.
or yeah, there's a lot of variables. And how what's a tip for if somebody's saying, how do I set these limits? How do I figure out what my expectations are? How do you go in and figure out whether something is realistic and practical and healthy as opposed to unrealistic, catastrophizing, and, possibly self-destructive?
Yeah, I think one place to start is just knowing our own values. I believe that's a great place in doing this deep thinking
Hmm.
about these potential scenarios. Is just knowing what we value, and I know that's a loaded statement, and values can mean a lot of different things, but to think about, what is it that I value? Is it my integrity?
Hmm.
Is it my own happiness and joy? Do I need to put myself first in this situation? Do I value community? Okay, well, if I strongly value community, maybe I need to accept a little bit of
Mm-hmm.
negativity to be a part of that work community or that family community. So, starting with our values and then thinking through what realistically could happen. And I think it's important when you're comfortable doing so to talk about this with someone and
Mm-hmm.
not to do it in isolation, because as realistic as I would love to say I am, I can let my mind wander. I really can.
Yeah.
And so maybe I need to talk to you. Maybe I need to talk to my spouse. Maybe I need to talk to my close friend at work and just bounce ideas off of them in terms of these scenarios, because they may be able to help you not catastrophize and to say, wait a minute, I don't think, I think the probability of that happening is really low.
Mm-hmm.
And they can validate that for you. They can kind of talk you down off of that, if you will. So I think not going about this in a silo is another way. So starting with values, what do you value? Doing some deep thinking about scenarios that could happen, and then talking about it in advance with someone that you trust.
All right. That's a great place to stop. Something people can do. Russell Clayton, russellclayton.net, PhD in University of Florida, right?
University of South Florida.
University of South Florida. All right, South Florida, the really good weather. Russell, thank you so much. And you do a personal coaching service. How can people reach out to you for that through your website?
Absolutely. russellclayton.net. And I would love to talk to anyone that would love to chat.
Russell, thanks so much for your time and advice.
Thank you so much, Liana. Happy holidays.
You too. All right, time for another break. But when we come back, I'm going to give you specific tips for dealing with specific types of difficult people during the holidays. There are as many types of people as there are stars in the sky, but certain types of difficult people, the patterns are so strong, they seem to come out of a stamping plant, right? So I'm going to give you the tools to make it slightly less painful when we come back on It's Not Therapy. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back for the final segment of this episode on It's Not Therapy on reducing holiday stress. And as promised, I'm going to give you direct tips of how to deal with some of the most difficult types of people you encounter over the holidays. Now, these are general categories, right? Not your personal final boss, not your personal Voldemort, just sort of groups of people. So if there's someone you're dealing with that I don't cover here and you need to reach out because you're like, oh my God, help. 289-275-9600, 289-275-9600, Liana at nottherapyshow.com. Or if you don't spell my name right, you can just fill out the contact form at nottherapyshow.com. Real simple, or at Not Therapy Show on Twitter and Instagram. So, up first, everybody's unfavorite, difficult holiday person, the nagger. And I can already hear people out there thinking, I'm not nagging. If you had that reaction, sorry, but yes, you are. Because everyone else's mind just went to the biggest nag in their life. And you felt like you had to defend yourself. But that's okay. Well, this will be hard for naggers to hear because the science on naggers is that they suffer from a nasty combination of being unable to tolerate their negative feelings and a lack of emotional vocabulary to express those feelings in healthier ways, in part because they were probably nagged too. So it is possible to be less of a nagger, but you're going to have to confront the tough stuff and find words to describe it better. Now, naggers need control, not over you per se, but over their environment. And that's important to keep in mind because since it's about them and not about you, you can't reason with them. You can only set boundaries. If nagging continues to give them that desperately needed sense of control, they'll keep nagging. And if they don't get what they want through nagging, they'll eventually stop. They'll kick and scream for a bit, but they'll eventually stop. Next type of person, And they can be combinations of these tendencies in a single person. Lucky you. But the next type of person is the torturer. The people who delight in insulting, belittling, or teasing people they don't think will give them any, or at least much, pushback. Now, these are deeply unhappy people who only feel bigger by making others feel small. I know that's a cliche, but sometimes they're true. Now, torturers were likely treated in the same way when they were younger and never matured. So, remember, you are the grown-up. They are not. Real simple. Look them right in the eye and say, Uncle Stan, I like you, but never speak to me that way again. If they challenge you, put them in timeout. Walk away. No, I'm serious. Walk away, even if that means getting up from the table. You're not making a scene. The torturer was. And if your family backs the torturer, that's a larger dynamic that it's best to address with time. Because there's a more low-key version of the torturer as well. I call them the needlers. My favorite Halo weapon, but not my favorite kind of person. Because needlers are more subtle versions of torturers, but they're no less nasty. In fact, in some ways, they're nastier because their digs are a lot more subtle. They can slip them in where people don't see them. You know, they'll say something awful and then they'll gaslight. And they're relying on the fact that a lot of bystanders are either emotionally lazy or conflict averse. Now, how to handle a needler depends on how conflict averse you are. Sometimes it's better to not respond. If you're very conflict averse, yeah, just don't respond and tell yourself they're being petty and not worth your time. But other times you have to call them on their BS because they've hit a nerve and it's rattling around. And you notice I said, don't respond, not just ignore them. You can't ignore these people. You can control your actions, but your reactions are not a moral failing. Okay, these people are insidious. You do have to call them on their BS sometimes, but you have to do it in a controlled way. A simple, I don't appreciate that comment, don't say it again, please, can be enough. They play wounded bird victim, let him. Because really, who cares? Again, they're being petty and not worth your time. And again, if your family backs them, it's a sign of a bigger problem that needs to be worked out over time. And it's worth working these things out over time because it'll lead to better relationships. Now then there's the group, the fishers, I call them. They never come out and say anything directly, but they fish, right? They hint. They fish for information. They fish for compliments. They fish for volunteers to do things. And it drives you crazy. And the way to counter the fishing is to ask directly, I think you're looking for something here. What is it? If they say nothing, because that's the knee-jerk reaction, because if they could just ask for things, they'd come up and be direct. So they might say nothing. Oh, nothing. Take them at their word, even though you know it's not true. Done. Next. Unfortunately, next might be the Karens. Now, apologies to people named Karen. It's a bad time to be named Karen, and I quite like the name Karen. You know, Karen Kane, National Ballet of Canada. Karen Kane's great. And Karens to me are every gender under the stars. And Karens are embarrassing when they're a part of your holiday gathering. They mistreat the wait staff. They gossip about people behind their backs. They excel at selfishly making other people miserable. And Karens are another group that relies on people not wanting to cause trouble or not wanting to make a scene. But they're making scenes. And because of that, it's totally appropriate to tell your host after the event that you won't attend if that Karen is there next time, because you don't support abusive people working for tips. Now, sometimes that person is just going through a bad time and they can change. But a lot of the time, They're just angry and miserable people, and they do this stuff because they can. It's a complex psychology. Some of them are actually looking for someone to push back, but that reflects on you if you keep that company. And especially in work environments, you don't know who's watching. One group I guarantee you isn't watching because they're so wrapped up in their own ish is what I call the drama barfers. Now, the drama barfers can be the easiest or the absolute hardest to deal with. And it all depends on the reasons for the drama barfing. You know what I'm talking about, right? That person who can be relied upon to have some crisis impacting them every other event, and it just seems like it's a thing to draw attention to themselves in a group of people. Proceed extremely carefully with drama barfers, because they might just have a trauma condition or incredible anxiety or depression. But drama barfers can also have a personality disorder, because this tendency to drama barf in public, most people are too embarrassed to air their personal business at a group gathering, certainly air their personal business that dramatically. But there always seems to be one that revels in that attention, even though it seems like their life is ending, right? It doesn't seem to click with them that they're oversharing at an inappropriate time. The best way to deal with a drama barfer is to not give, their attention-seeking routine any light or oxygen. Don't get pulled into their orbit. Keep as much distance, physically if possible, but definitely emotionally and socially, as possible. Because once you're in the drama barf splash zone, guess what gets on you, right? And that's where the personality disorder thing comes in. You'll be the greatest person in that moment, and then you'll be the worst person in the world when they split, when they go black or white reasoning, and you don't want to be a part of that. And we are running really low on time, so I gotta wrap. Next week, if your holiday stuff goes horribly, it's a disaster, whatever, it's okay. We're gonna talk about what happens when things go wrong, how you can recover, how to rebuild and possibly build something even better than you had before. We're going to have a guest that overcame that sort of adversity next week. Until then, I am Liana Kirstner. I am still not a therapist. Not Therapy Show, Twitter, Instagram, you know the drill. You also know you're crazy is only a problem if it's hurting you. Talk next week.